Is that the problem there? I mean, it's just because then you can publish in a journal from the States or Europe, because there it's a problem. So that is not a good way. You assess the research in another way. Societal impact, collaborations, if you work together with people from your country and other countries. And you should raise the funding for the local language journals, because you can save money in not paying for all the articles that are published in the very expensive journals from the north. So that would be a way to do it. And you probably develop your own criteria. There are lots of criteria there, but you develop your own criteria for what is a good scientist, what is good science, what matters. So the task at are, take equality as a starting point. Equal, the equality. The quality of northern journals versus other journals, northern science versus other science, northern scientists versus other scientists, and find your own best way to do research that matters. Ubuntu, we would say. Increase the collaboration. Those are the key messages. Ujamaa, as you all know. And there is a lot of good research being done in Africa. I learned here in the hall, there is enzymes being sold to Europe and the US, which are much more stable for biochemical research. And they are researched or discovered in Africa from your local flora. There is much of indigenous knowledge in Africa, and you should take advantage of that. And that is some part of the knowledge that is ignored until now. So thank you very much, and I hope to see you and speak to you if you have any questions.
Thank you so much, Madam Chair. So what I'm going to take you through is open science and African perspectives, and how, through strategic partnerships, we've managed to create an impact in democratizing knowledge. Now, when we are talking about this, we need to look at the various aspects and the landscape in Africa that influence open science, and one of them is the funding landscape. So when you look at Africa right now, we take pride since 2007 when the African Union mandated that African countries must spend at least 1% of their GDP in STNI. We ended up having 16 countries that met that cut, and they created granting councils. So this is funding that is coming from the government. But then when you critically look at the landscapes within those countries, the in-country funders, as I call them, we have universities and research institutions that are giving funding or research scholarships, and this is from preset agendas because they've already reached out to the potential funders to fund the identified research areas. Then we have supranational organizations in academia. We have the Africa Academy of Sciences, we have the RUFORUM, we have the Science for Africa, we have the Association of African Universities, and these are all in line with preset agendas, and they are considered as funders within the continent. And of course, we have funded programs, some of which you're aware of, like the African Academy of Sciences. So these are all funded. This is still part of the funding landscape in Africa, and you'll realize that except for the science granting councils that have a direct influence because it's at a national level, the others still have to rely on their agenda from the funder, which is from the Global North. So when you're looking at the open science perspectives, how can these funders, this entire landscape, influence open science and democratize knowledge? So I'll share that with you. So let's start with the trends. So these are the 16 countries that have created the science granting councils. And let's have a look. I picked 2 countries so that you can understand how bad or good the situation is. It depends on how you look at it. So in South Africa, the top 10 funders, in-country funders, you can see the list there. And the first one is a program funder, as I'd mentioned earlier on. And that one already relies on a preset agenda that is already set by the funders. So when you're looking at them influencing open science, the first question is, how do you think that can be done? And to be honest, one of the ways we are looking at and has begun is by them including article processing costs when they are sending out calls for funding. It must be included. So that is a small aspect of open science catered for, but that is not enough. But the fact that they already have a preset agenda, one of the weaknesses that they have is that they cannot fund the production of journals, but they can influence the incentivization of the researchers. They can influence the incentivization of the researchers who receive the funding, because they're in that position to demonstrate that, yes, we are promoting open science, and the recipients of this research can be eligible to another cycle of funding. So they're in that position to influence the cycle. Then the top 10 in-country funders in Kenya. I'm Kenyan. As you can see, we can see the National Research Fund, and the National Research Fund is a granting council. Just for context, we were looking at funders that are giving funding year on year. And this also brings out a very strong political dynamic. Even though we are celebrating the granting councils, not all of them can give funding year on year. Other than the NRF in South Africa and the TET Fund in Nigeria, the others, it's hit and miss. It's not regularly year on year. So that also creates another political dynamic. So we need to be also careful with the minimal amount of money that they have. How can they still influence change, especially when it comes to incentivization? Now, these are the current trends on research performance in Africa. So in the last 10 years, we've produced over 1.1 million records in terms of research output. That's not, well, we could do better. It's all 54 countries, including the ocean islands or the sea islands. And then out of that, 50.9% of our work is open access. And this can be clearly seen that the jump was clearly seen from 2018 when Plan S was enacted. Now, another trend is that African researchers are increasingly using progressive approaches to open science and academic publishing, because they are seeing the importance of how these progressive models are helping in increasing the visibility of their research output. So bearing this in mind, so it goes back to the funders to acknowledge the fact that African researchers are already taking advantage of these progressive academic publishing models, so they need to be incentivized based on the fact that they're already using them. So as you can see from 2018, the oldest preprint that has been produced by an African researcher was in 1978, but as you can see from 2018 to this year, there is a huge jump, and obviously from 2020 is because of the COVID-19. And because of that, we had to come up with a very ingenious way in democratizing knowledge. Number one, as you can see, that a landscape was entirely to make sure, as much as we are adopting open science, we need African output indexed in these platforms that are being shared with us. Because that was also another big problem. We have, thanks to open science, we have a lot of databases coming into the continent, but there's limited output being indexed from Africa in this platform. So with our partners, Dimensions, that's what we've been doing, making sure that we're indexing African output. With Figshare, we are creating library literacy amongst the librarians to understand the FAIR principles, because it's all about infrastructure and understanding the ecosystem in infrastructure to help increase the visibility of African output. And with PLOS, we are looking at creating awareness at policy, regional, and institutional level, such that we have vice chancellors coming, accepting and having mandates, open science mandates within their institutes. So with Dimensions, we've launched Dimensions in partnership with Ministries of Education, and it also involves strategic partnerships. Ministry of Education, library councils, granting councils, research councils, and we've launched Dimensions in all these platforms. Think Scopus, but the free version, 100% citation analysis, but the best part is that they're also indexing African output. These are the partners that we have successfully indexed in Dimensions, and because of that, a paper was published recently in PLOS ONE, and they found out that Dimensions has the largest amount of output coming out of the continent as compared to Web of Science and Scopus. So if any of your institutions have indexed, have subscribed to that, realize you're doing yourself a bit of a disservice, and this is actually free of charge. And this is what we're talking about. democratizing knowledge, but also indexing our output so that it is also accessible. Because so far it has always been one way. You're giving us information and data, but we're not able to put our information in those platforms. With PLOS, it's the policy dialogue at regional and institutional and national level. At regional level, we are working with supranational, so we are looking at the East African Community, the East African Parliament, SADC, and ECOWAS. And then we also notice, as much as we're having this conversation on open science, vice chancellors are not accepting the open science movement. They are grudgingly getting on board. And that, because of that, we are having quite a lot of conversations on within the institutes, and these are some of the meetings we've had in Eastern Africa and in West and in Northern Africa, and cumulatively we are looking at about 700 vice chancellors and university leadership who came for these meetings, because we noticed that of all the 1,225 universities, only 36 have open access mandates. They are still not taking up the whole movement. So there's a need to have further conversations. And as you can see, these are some of the concerns they have raised, that there's insufficient information being brought to their desk. And even the conversation on open science comes as open access, not the entire spectrum. And these are some of the recommendations, and one of it is on incentivization. So going back to the funders, with the limited funding that they have, how else are we able to make sure that they can influence that change? So as I mentioned with Figshare, is on the library literacy, so I can get that into details. But this in particular is very important for researchers to know, because as we are adopting progressive approaches to publishing, it means that we're using preprints, and most of them are stored in preprint repositories. So Africa's preprint repository is Africa Archive, and it's about 5 years old, but we're also seeing institutional repositories and regional preprint repositories. So these are some of the changes that you're seeing in the continent, but we're going a step further and mapping all the repositories in each country of each institution so that you can see what is happening in the region as well. So what are we proposing? We want the granting councils and the in-funding funder institutions to influence the change, especially when it comes to progressive academic publishing models, when it comes to incentivization. They may not afford on the diamond open access publishing, but they can influence that change by saying that you can get another cycle of funding. We recognize researchers who publish not only in traditional models, but also in progressive models, because the progressive models are normally adopted by early career researchers, and that's the bulk you want to target. And we need increased policy dialogue, especially among higher education leadership. And we also noticed, we also been invited by Senate, for Senate meetings by vice chancellors to give them a value proposition on why we need to adopt open science. So you see the demand is there, and they are being proactive about it. But the most important thing is that we need to know that the future of African science publishing must be more progressive. We are heading that way by experimenting with different formats and contents towards a sensitive and inclusive approach. And this means popularizing region-specific solutions, what Tom was saying, and also embracing open journal venues with progressive business models. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much to my two panelists for their on-point and on-time interventions. So what we now have is 15 minutes just to engage with them, if we will, before we transition to the second part. So could I perhaps have indications of whoever wants to make a comment or pose a question? Michael, I see you. Great, I've got 3 hands. I'll start there. So you'll be second and you will be third, and then I'll come for a second round. I've seen your hand. Thanks, Michael.
I'm Michael Cherry from Stellenbosch University. I think it's very important to make mention of one thing, but maybe the panelists could comment on this. So in South Africa, at least, our National Research Foundation, unless it's changed its policy very recently, doesn't provide on grants applications for open access publishing charges. And whereas that's a big major difference between here and many Western countries where it's in fact a requirement that you write onto your grant your open access. And so the funding of open access author charges tends to then devolve into the universities, and we all know that universities in this country have had a rather rough ride over the last decade or so in particular, And so it's yet another thing that universities have had to deal with. But it would seem to me that the point of lobby should be at the funding councils, and that government should actually give them additional funding and earmark it for that purpose.
Okay, thank you, Michael. I'll take the second and the third, and then we'll allow the panelists to engage. So would you please introduce yourself? Take a minute to tell us. The microphone is coming. Up here, please.
Thank you very much. My name is Masresha Fatana. I'm the co-president for IAP. It's very gratifying to know that granting institutions in Africa are increasing, like you said, although it's only very few of them that grant year on year. My question is, from my own country, the granting institution is not that independent. It's only one department of government body, and they're very highly influenced by the policy of that institution. But granting institutions should be more autonomous and independent to act meaningfully. I'm trying to ask how many of the granting institutions you saw in Africa are independent and autonomous in a way? Thank you very much.
Thank you. There was a third hand over there.
Thank you. Hi, I'm Diego Baptista from the Wellcome Trust. So working at a funding agency, I totally get the calls for funders should try to incentivize research based on the social impact of it, right? We're trying to move away from metrics like where you've published and who you did your PhD with or who you did your training with. I find this practically very difficult because actually understanding the social impact of a basic biomedical research idea takes quite a lot of work, and it takes time and resource, and we actually don't see basic biomedical researchers partnering with social scientists to understand that before they're coming in for a grant. So I'd just love to hear your kind of practical suggestions for doing this if you were a funder.
Great. So, Joy, you've got the mic. Will you go first? And then let Tom respond. Yeah?
All right. To begin with, so in terms of independence, the reality is that all of the granting councils fall under the Ministries of Science and Technology and Higher Education. Okay? And the Ministries of Science and Technology and Higher Education report to Parliament. So it's heavily reliant on the political economy of the day. And that is why I gave Kenya as an example. The last granting cycle that we actively gave was in 2019, and this is something that has been published in the University World News. You can see this. And it doesn't mean that we're not producing research. We're still producing research, but it goes to show the political dynamics in most of the granting councils that they face. So we are in a good space that we already have the granting councils. We are creating the infrastructural systems to support future researchers. But there are some teething problems that we need to acknowledge. So even with the limited amount of money that they have and the political dynamics that they are facing, it's looking at how they can be an influence of change in the kind of incentivization programs that they give, such that they don't necessarily focus on traditional models of publishing, because academic publishing is changing as it is right now. Practical suggestions, right. When you're looking at the practical suggestions, when you're talking about impact, you're looking at, let's take a step back. The way funders were quick to say that this is public money and our research needs to be accessible, you're already influencing change. And that is what we are saying right now. You're in a position to influence change on the type of incentivization that the recipients can get. Because the reason why we are seeing vice chancellors not being positive about adopting open science is because it's not clear how they are going to incentivize their researchers. So if the government or the in-country funders have a scheme whereby they also include open science outputs, because literally most of the open science outputs has a social impact most of the time, because you want easy access to the research. So you will use the quickest platform for easy access, and COVID-19 was a classic example. People use preprints. But if you're not going to acknowledge researchers who use preprints and incentivize them, the vice chancellors and leadership in institutions will be very slow in adopting open science. So what we are saying is influence change. You've already started the process by saying it is donor funding, it is public money, we need access to it. So what we are saying, go a step further and say we are recognizing various progressive academic publishing models, and you can give timelines to it. You're really in a position to gauge how that can work, but influence the change such that when a researcher is applying for funding, they know that they can easily get another cycle of funding if they produce a preprint, or if they use any other progressive academic publishing model, which is now being widely accepted now in the academic community. Yes.
Yes, I also comment on the second part then, the practical thing. So I can talk from the way things go in my country, in the Netherlands. People have decided that they are not going to look at the impact factor of the journals where it's published. And what is asked from the researchers is to give their 3 best papers, in their view, wherever it's published. And then it will be looked at by all the scientists. What is it? What does it matter? What did it do after the time that it was published? And then it will also be looked at in the social context, you know. What did it bring to society? Or did it only bring glory to the scientist, you know? Like that. And if you are a teacher, until now, people didn't get much credit. Now we are looking in the Netherlands to the assessment of teachers. So the teachers are also judged by their students. Are they good teachers? And as you know, in the universities, teaching is a key thing, but it has become very low in what you want to do. Because the researchers want to do research, and they don't want to teach. In the United States, it's very much different. If you are a good teacher there, then you make a career. And we have to go a bit in between. We have to go and find good teachers. And we know that they are good teachers because the students say so. And that is a practical way to do things. I know that the university councils that nominate professors, etc., it's very easy to go for numbers. You have a spreadsheet and you say this person has 120 points and the other one has 73 points. So we take the 130 points. It's easy. But it's not easy. I show you that publishing in a high-impact journal is not necessarily a good scientist. So we have to go away from that thinking, you know. And yeah, those are practical suggestions. I know it takes more time, but you will get better science.
Thank you. We have 5 minutes, so I shall take another round. There was a lady at the back. Was that you, right? So that's one. I've been told I have left eye dominance. It's indeed true. I'm only looking this way. So 1, 2, 3, 4. Very quick, like 30 seconds. If I give you my mic, send it back up, please.
Sure, no problem. No, thank you very much to the presentations. My name is Catherine Nkila, Professor Nkila, the former Executive Director of the African Academy of Sciences. And so we are co-hosting this session with ESAF. My question is related to the relationship between impact factor and open science or open access. I just wanted to hear some comments on that. But also, we tend to associate with open access as cheap, and also there is also the myth or a belief that these are predatory journals if they are open. So I don't know how Joy and Mark, how you're addressing this particular issue so that we can be able to incentivize majority of the publishers as well as the universities and also related research councils. Thank you.
Thank you very much. The lady behind you, yes. And then who had the mic? There are 2 people at the back. Yeah.
Morning, everyone. Thank you so much for the interesting talks. I'm Danny from Stellenbosch University. Just regarding the thoughts on the call to funders to incorporate more aspects like societal impact into assessment, I think that it's important for us to also consider how we assess this. So we don't want to create another tick box culture where we say, okay, we've published a popular science article or we've done a radio interview, so we've done our knowledge transfer. And we want to make sure that what we're doing is actually effective engagement. So I wanted to put forward, how do we measure this impact? How do we measure something like human dignity or empowerment and then support that sort of stuff so that we can create research for impact?
Thank you. My name is Gugu Moche, and I'm from the National Research Foundation. Just very quick question on open access / open science. That when it comes to research that finally you will see exploitation of IP or innovation, as some people will say. When it comes to that, maybe to our last speaker, I think is Ms. Joyce, any thoughts around open science when it comes to innovation and particularly exploitation of IP?
Thank you. There was one last hand. Yeah.
Thank you. Speaking of Włocki, Director of National Science Center in Poland. In fact, we are one of the founding members of Plan S. And well, first let me remark that the issue of north-south division and inequalities, we have a very similar thing within Europe, but it is then more west-east. And in this regard, I think relatively our position in Poland is problems in this regard are quite similar. Now I have two short remarks about that. So one about spending money on publishing in open access subscriptions and other things. My advice would be to be very careful about that, especially in countries where the money for the funds for science are very limited, because I generally believe the system is totally broken and we spend way too much public money on scientific publishing. And personally, as a mathematician, I would advise for a more green approach to this. We have a system of repositories working in mathematics and physics for many years, and that is definitely much cheaper. But on the other hand, you have to maintain both in terms of publishing, but it also funding science, remember about maintaining quality. And that's, I think, for kind of developing countries in this area is very important to remember about that, and to be competitive on the international stage. Okay.
Thank you very much. So it's 10 past and we do have to hand over, but Iqbal, can we have 1 minute? Thank you. I'm going to allow my panelists to take 30 seconds each, like very quick engagement with some of the comments and questions. And hopefully at the end we might have another opportunity. Yeah, Joy? All right.
So in terms of impact factor and open science, there's been, the discussion of impact factor is very tethy, and you'll find that there's always a 0.1% who actually benefit from it. This is why we're saying that when the funders instinctively say beyond, we are going to incentivize beyond researchers that have published in X type of impact factor, and it is happening really today. If they say we are going to go beyond that, it means that you'll end up having more researchers publishing in journals that are relevant to their region or to the targeted community that they're looking at. So most organizations are moving away from the impact factor. They're looking at much more progressive ways on research assessment. And as I said, it still comes down to the funders influencing that process. It's saying we are going beyond the impact factor. We are looking at other progressive ways on assessing research and incentivizing researchers on that. In regards to the innovation and IP and exploitation, Now, these are some of the unintended, we cannot romanticize the whole process of open science because there are unintended consequences of open science. This is why there's a lot of policy dialogue and institutional dialogue going on right now in the continent. We are doing this as a center with the Association of African Universities, with UNESCO, so that everybody can be aware about what open science entails. Let's not romanticize or romanticize the process, but have practical solutions to it, and also be cognizant of the fact that you can be as open as necessary. We're not saying 100% open, and as open as also, thank you, and as closed as possible, because we need to also be cognizant of the unintended consequences, especially when it comes to IP and innovation, which is such a tethy issue. In regards to green open access, yes, we want the green open access, but the funders are saying, no, we want you to publish in the traditional models of, use the traditional models. So green open access is one of the progressive approaches to publishing, but we want funders to recognize this. When they recognize this, it means also the recipients, these are the higher education institution leaders, are much more comfortable to send that message to the academic communities, because as Tom was saying earlier on, within the university system, there are points on promotion. And I assure you, the highest point is where if you publish in high-impact journals. Yes.
Yes, I will be very short then. Open science, open access. The difference between open science and open access is immense, because open science is all of the things. It's how you do science, how you share your results. You collaborate. You have to collaborate with people. You don't do something like very much of competition. Of course, you compete groups with groups, but you're not competing one against the other. And open access means that you give access to your research to all people, not only to the researchers. We can think that the farmers cannot understand what you are doing in your agricultural research, but it's not true. It has been proven many times that it's not true. You know, there was a boy in the United States who devised a test for cancer, pancreatic cancer, and he was 15 years old, you know, because he read open access papers. So, how to measure impact, social impact? I cannot answer that. I don't know, but I think there are social scientists who very well know how to measure impact in society. So we should use that. We are also very much focused on this mathematical, physical sciences, and we don't take advantage of all the knowledge that is there, you know. So we should ask them. So one more thing about East and Western Europe. It's very true. There is also a divide there. I think we spend too much money on publishing, because publishing in the digital age is not expensive. And the publisher can say that they give a lot of extra information, but lots of the services that they provide are just gratuit. The reviewers are doing the things for nothing. And I think we should have journals that are made not for making the profit of the shareholders, of the companies, you know. And for the repositories, I think the big problem is that it's very much scattered around the globe. It's very difficult to find the information in the total of the repositories that is there. You have to have a program to find it. And not all the repositories are online all the time. And there is not a requirement in the repositories to have a license. So you don't know what you can do.
Thank you so much, Prof. Parker.
Thank you very much to the previous speakers. We will now change track slightly. In the next session, we will focus on funding disparities, especially focusing on research funding in Africa. And one of the important aspects of international donor funding very often is that it comes with additional demands, sometimes bordering on the dictatorial. And I will not go into the detail. I will rely on the speakers to address it. So without much ado, let me introduce the speakers in the order that they will be presenting. The first speaker will be Felix de Cora, who is the president of the African Academy of Science. He currently holds a research chair and still is very active in research. The second speaker probably needs no introduction. It will be a video presentation by Professor Thuli Madonsela, who is the previous public protector of South Africa and currently is a professor of law at Stellenbosch University. And the final speaker, but not least, is Magdalene Schepper, has a distinguished career in scientific publishing and is currently the editor of Nature. Thank you very much. So,
good morning, everyone. Are you tired? Good morning. Thank you, thank you. Oh, it's afternoon. Oh, I'm sorry. I see why you didn't respond. Basically, I want to latch onto the theme that we've just heard, and essentially that open science covers inter alia many, many things. And where I'm pitching in is at the level of science funding and science journalism. That's crucial, because if we don't address these issues, I think we're not going to go far. Why is it not coming? Something wrong? Is the battery dead? Okay. All right. Okay, so basically, as you all know, it's not a new story I'm telling. African governments and institutions are often criticized for corruption and bad governance. If so, why would powerful funders from the global north frustrate the African Academy of Sciences when it wanted to put its house in order? And this is a true story, okay? Why would funders oppose a forensic audit conducted by the AAS, or for that matter, the AAS Governing Council, to keep its house clean? Why would anybody want to do that? Why would any funder oppose transparency in science funding and science management for social justice? So these are questions that I would like to answer, and in the process, I'll be able to share with you what happened to the African Academy of Sciences. You are all literate, you've read all sorts of articles. Today is where I want to place the truth before the world. So in 2021, the African Academy of Sciences, otherwise called AAS, was rocked with serious challenges when its governing council sought to have transparency in its science funding and grants management through a forensic audit. This was, however, met with strong resistance by powerful funders from the global north and their internal allies managing the academy's funds in the Secretariat. Essentially, to block the audit, the AAS was instructed by funders not to use their project overheads to pay for the forensic audit. All right. If you get a grant, the overheads belong to, and you should use the overheads as you like. In this instance, we're instructed not to do that. We're not allowed to touch the overheads. As a result, anyway, the GC or Governing Council financed the audit with funds from the interest of the Academic's Endowment Fund. The AAS could not understand why the strong resistance by funders to transparency. If there's transparency in northern science, it should also occur in southern science. So we didn't understand why. At meetings, the language that was used by some funders to members of the Governing Council was very rude, highly disrespectful, and condescending, almost bordering on racism. Okay? As a result, a protest letter dated 24th January 2021 from the Governing Council to funders concluded, lastly, quoting the Zimbabwean writer Andrew Masuku, the author of Dimensions of New Civilization, dignity is far more valuable than money and wealth. This was out of pain by the Governing Council to be able to write this. In essence, all what the GC members were asking for from funders is dignity in how they were treated, as well as transparency in the funding model. In the course of the audit, a funder actually flew from a country in the global north to Kenya, where the forensic audit was being done, in order to engage with the forensic audit firm. And we asked the question, why? Why so? Why did a funder have to do that? Now, what we found out from, this is the audit findings inter alia, among all other things, salaries were increased by 11.5% up to 76% for some staff without the approval of the Governing Council. Clearly, this is not best practice. Okay? A program director wrote to himself to increase his own salary and signed his own letter to receive the increase. Is this normal? A senior advisor attached to the AS by a powerful funder from the Global North announced to the AS Fellows that he had donated $500,000 to the Academy, when in fact the audit found only $400,000 in the bank account. Is this normal? This is the North, not the South, where corruption is alleged to be so rampant. With all the evidence above, inter alia, the funders said they saw no wrongdoing. So in the North, you can sign checks to yourself, increase your salary as you wish. You know, it's just, anyway. Now, I've touched on that. You've seen a bit of what I've just said. Let me now go to science funding and funds management for social justice. So furthermore to what we've just seen, a grant of $9.7 million was awarded to the AS by a funder from the Global North without copying the president or the Governing Council of the award. So in essence, it's like a check signed off to an individual because you cannot control it. If the president doesn't know, the Governing Council doesn't know, then you know, it's money you can spend any way you want. Also, $700,000 out of the $9.7 million was given as discretionary funds to the program director without a cent paid as overheads to the AS. Colleagues, is this what they do in the North? I mean, we've got some people from the Global North here. Is that what you do in the North when you fund people? We need to ask very serious questions because this meeting is about let's say, funding for social justice. Is this addressing social justice? And it's very important that we understand the issues at stake. Should science funding for social justice be personalized? Because if you give Felix Dakura $700,000, you personalize the grant. And yet you claim that you're giving money to develop knowledge in Africa for Africans. But you can give $700,000 to somebody. I wish I were to be that director. I probably wouldn't be here. Now, furthermore, the funders and their allies in the Secretariat put up a brand new building on the AAS campus without any discussions with the Academy or approval by the Governing Council. So if you look down, this is the building that was put up. Now, again, to be realistic, can anybody just put a building on your campus, on your property, without your permission? But this happened to the AS by powerful northern funders. So I wanted to all see the building. You can take photographs of it if you like. So let me go back to the last one. So clearly, the African Academy of Sciences was captured by powerful funders from the Global North. And African science and Africa's premier think tank was just waiting to be recolonized. And that's what it was. If somebody comes to build on your plot without your permission, you are captured. Now, I'm coming to science journalism, because out of this, certain things emerged. And there too, we haven't found social justice. I understand there are some journalists in this, attending this conference. I hope some of you are here. Now, there was a Nature editorial. You've got the details there. One of the statements that came out of that editorial is that funders say they have lost confidence in the academy's governance. This follows internal tensions that led to the suspension of senior staff members. The basis of the disagreement has not been made public. This is what the Nature editorial said. But I've just shared with you what those funders were doing. I mean, I shared that with you. They turned around and put the facts the other way around to say that, oh, at the age they've lost confidence in the academic's governance. We wanted good governance. They don't want it. And they now tell the world through this editorial that indeed they pulled out because of bad governance. When we resisted and wanted to, well, what I also didn't tell you, the program that they funded, excuse me, they resolved that we had no right at all to conduct a forensic audit of those programs. Was it something they were fear would be uncovered? Is this funding for social justice? So the above narrative by the funders about the AAS is simply not true. And I'd like those of you here, when you walk out, to understand all those articles written. By the way, the audit report is on the website of the AAS. It's in the public domain. So you can get all the details. So what they've said is not true. However, it is true that funders did not want the GC, the Governing Council, to conduct a forensic audit, and did everything possible to block it. Funders also ruled that the AISA platform, I think I've just said that, you know, should not be, where they invest their money, must not be audited. So we didn't audit them. Now, the AAS is seeking a social and natural justice after the Nature's editorial. Firstly, from what I'm not a journalist, but I'm sure those who are journalists will agree with me that journalists have the right to publish stories on anything and everything in order to keep the readership and society informed and educated. A very good thing. However, they must verify their source of information to ensure that what is published is factual and credible. Secondly, the individual or organization covered by the publication has the right of response. That's what I'm told. I'm not a journalist, but you have the right of response. It is important to note that in writing the Nature editorial about AAS, the Academy was not contacted by the editor to verify the validity and factuality of the information given by funders, okay, before the article was published. In my view, that would be an error in journalism. You have to verify the source. It is important to note that, as a result, the Nature editorial has misled the world about what really happened at the AAS, as you can see from what I've narrated to you. I have met somebody, or rather somebody from Edinburgh, talking to me, said there was a discussion about the AAS issues in Glasgow when the fellow went there. I was in Berlin, I met someone and said, oh, disappointed. See, the AAS people are fighting among themselves. This is what the world has been told, and that's what the world believes. But you in this room, you've heard the facts as they are. And you can also go and look at our website. Knowing that the AAS has a right of response, the Governing Council sent a letter of, sent a written response to the editor for publication in Nature in order to counter the inaccuracies in the Nature editorial. However, after some weeks, the AAS received an email response from the editor on 18th November 2021 saying, we will get back to you shortly. Since then, the AAS has sent about 4 email reminders to the editor. The AAS made one phone call also to the office of the editor. the AAS held a virtual meeting with the editor and a colleague on 21st February 2022, where the Governing Council provided all the facts about what I've just shared with you. On 14th March 2022, the AAS sent a letter reminding the editor to publish the AAS response. The AAS president, that is me, also met the Nature editor at the Fallen World Science Summit in Berlin, which took place 7 to 9 November 2022, and again urged the editor to publish the AAS response. But so far, nothing has happened. Is this science journalism for social justice? Is this what happens in the global north? The forensic audit findings interpreted by forensic lawyers at ENS Africa found very damning evidence of financial misconduct against some staff. On 15 September 2021, these reports were forwarded on request to an individual called Sarah Wild, a science journalist who was working on an article for Nature. So far, however, the AAS has not seen any published article based on the factual reports from the audit. So I just want to say that, in conclusion, there is a need for transparency in science funding, especially in the global south. There is also a need for fairness and mutual respect in science journalism, especially when dealing with the global south. I thank you.
Okay, we'll have the video by Thuli Madonsela next. We're just waiting on our technical people to get it online. Okay, the presentation by Thuli Vadantsela is going to be a live streaming, but there's a technical problem getting it going. So I suggest that we do not waste time, that we go straight to Magdalena Schipper. Thank you.
Thank you very much. That's great. I have my slides now. I had them. They will come back. Let me start by saying that it's my first time in Cape Town, although not my first time in South Africa. It's really an amazing privilege to be here. And the opening ceremony yesterday was a true inspiration. It really is rare to see such political presence at a scientific meeting. I think that's such a strong message that is sent to the world throughout, not just to other governments in Africa, but governments everywhere around the world, and to the scientific community. And the presence of the president himself and his speech were really particularly impressive. So really glad to be here. And third time lucky. The presentation appeared again and then it disappeared. So what I will talk about is, thank you very much. What I will talk about takes us a little bit back to the first part of the of our discussion here, and that's focusing really on that issue of knowledge democracy for social justice, and specifically what a publisher, a journal, an editor can bring to this important conversation. So nature has been around for a very long time, and just as everything that has been around for a long time, we have changed quite dramatically. One of the things that hasn't changed, though, is actually our mission right from the very first day when we were launched back in 1869. The mission of the journal has been to serve the research community by publishing the original research, but also by bringing that original research to the widest possible audience, putting it in a context. And that's what we continue to do today. How we do it has evolved quite significantly. And so the main way in which we can support the cause is actually by supporting and championing fairness in research. And I want to give you some vignettes on how we do that. So first of all, original research, which we publish in our pages, Your Research. And we ensure fairness in a number of ways. Of course, papers that come to us are ready, the research has been done, but nevertheless, we can make quite some influence on how that research is presented and how it's revised subsequently. So first of all, it's through peer review, making sure that the reviewers represent the regions from which the research comes from, that the reviewers have the right insight and can understand the context and the real value of the research is done. And also the ability for subsequent revisions of that research, how feasible that is. Through editorial policy, such as, for example, recently developed policies on the need for science to do no harm as a first principle, and also an editorial policy which is designed to safeguard against helicopter research and ethics dumping. So originally, when Nature was launched, and for many years, we as editors were not involved in aspects of authorship on papers because we believed that clearly when a manuscript is submitted to us, the authorship has already been decided. Nevertheless, we began to see papers which, for example, were conducted by researchers in the global north, but the research was conducted in the global south, and the participants who contributed to the research were only acknowledged in the acknowledgements as opposed to listed as authors. Well, now we have developed a policy which actually means that the editors will challenge the corresponding authors to revisit, if you like, whether that acknowledgement of contribution is appropriate. It might be, but it may not be. And we actually have some very gratifying examples of corresponding authors being actually very grateful for these kinds of reminders that actually the colleagues who perhaps collected data or contributed some aspects of analysis warrant co-authorship and appropriate credit. So that's just one example. And ethics dumping, of course, refers to a practice where you conduct ethical research that will be unethical in your home country or your home institution, but you somehow feel, obviously inappropriately, that it's okay to do it somewhere else. In the magazine content of Nature, so that's where we publish our news, our opinions, and commentaries, we commission from expert authors and also work with journalists. And our focus there is to be covering as diverse aspects of science done by as diverse stakeholders as possible to represent those diverse points of view. And it pertains to research itself, it pertains to research funding, pertains to how research is organized, and indeed what was discussed at the beginning of this session, how research is evaluated. And we have been writing about evaluation of research for some 15 years, arguing that it's completely inappropriate to use impact factors of journals, which, by the way, were developed as a tool for librarians to decide which journal to subscribe to. And arguing indeed that there are so many different aspects that researchers engage in as part of their research activity, and those aspects should be valued. Take, for example, mentorship. Education was mentioned earlier. Mentorship, hugely important. Some 12, 13 years ago, we set up an award for outstanding mentoring in science, because mentoring, while we all agree is really important, is completely underappreciated. Today is our Open Science Day here at the World Science Forum, organized with support of UNESCO, of course. So I wanted to share with you some specific aspects in which we as editors champion open science in the papers that appear in Nature, but also in other journals of the Nature portfolio. So we encourage preprint deposition. We actually actively encourage our authors to deposit preprints at the time when they submit papers to Nature. The COVID-related papers, we mandated preprint deposition because we wanted to make sure that the research was available before peer review as quickly as it was written up in a form of a draft manuscript. We encourage and in some fields mandate data deposition, and without that papers will not be published in Nature. We in fact include a compulsory data availability statement to make sure that there is transparency about whether data have been deposited in a public repository or whether they are available in some other way, but they have to be made available. That's a condition of publication in our pages. We encourage code sharing, and of course we know that code is increasingly a basis of more and more research across disciplines. And we've actually paired with an organization called Code Ocean, which create a sort of a capsule in which code can be run and tested, and we use that for our peer reviewers so they can review code, and subsequently that's co-published with the paper that is sufficiently dependent on code so that the readers can scrutinize that when the paper is published. We encourage protocol sharing, and in a number of ways. There are a number of protocol repositories. We also provide one that's Nature Protocols, but we're completely agnostic where the protocols are shared. And a number of years we've instigated what we call transparent peer review. And so when a manuscript is published, referee reports are co-published with the manuscript. So it's clear how the manuscript has evolved and how that conversation around peer review has unfolded between the reviewers, the authors, and the editors. Speaking of peer review, one thing that we feel very strongly about is, of course, that peer review is an absolutely crucial part in science communication and science publishing. And so we mentor early career researchers in peer review. outstanding peer reviewers who provide constructive criticisms to papers are absolutely instrumental in publication of quality research, which therefore is going to have impact. And clearly, research which is not done with quality is not going to have any kind of impact, whether it's academic or social. So moving towards the magazine part of Nature, an important aspect of what we do is to offer a platform for voices from across the world, researchers, policymakers, but also campaigners who campaign for research to be done, for example, in a more inclusive, more creative type of fashion, and for policymakers to base their policies more on science-focused facts. And so here are just some examples of pieces that we published recently. For example, in a section called Where I Work, we showcase the diversity of topics that research touches. We showcase the diversity of individuals who do research. You know, this very outmoded idea that a scientist is a man and a white man, and usually it's Einstein, right? We all know that that's a completely outmoded image of a scientist, and we all collectively need to work towards changing it. We provide a platform for comments, such as, for example, this one, Building Science in Africa. So much has been said already at this panel about the importance of funding of science in Africa. The agency, we heard that, you know, funders who provide the funding will drive the so much of the direction in which science goes. It's incredibly important that those voices who call for additional funding of science on the continent, from the continent, are heard, and then those voices are heard globally, not just locally. And we also publish other, on other topics, such as the sort of what I would call social aspects of research, such as this example here about travel bans, how travel bans and issues associated with visa availability hamper access to knowledge and knowledge exchange, depending on where you come from as a researcher. And that, in turn, of course, should make all the conference organizers think where conferences are organized, how accessible are they really if they're in a country that is particularly restrictive in terms of providing visa access to researchers. But we also, a few years ago, we felt that the pages of Nature were not sufficient to give the right, of course, Nature has a finite size, to give the attention to the research on the continent that it required. So we started a science news platform called Nature Africa. It's been publishing for about a year now. The editor of Nature Africa is based in Lagos. That's my colleague, Akin Jimon. And we collaborate on journalism, writing about African science policy in Africa, but also importantly in the global context. And as you can see, the site is published both in French and in English. Another way in which we have changed at Nature, looking back in our history, is that we're very focused on, as I said, what I just a second ago referred to as social aspect of science. Science is done by people, and therefore its social aspect is particularly important. And we cannot move forward in scientific enterprise if we don't examine our own home, if you like, for the prejudice that exists there. And so just over a month ago, we published a special issue focused on systemic racism in science. And for the first time in Nature's history, we actually appointed an advisory group. So Nature has no external advisors, unlike essentially all other journals. But in order to prepare this special issue, we appointed 4 Black researchers and research activists. When we started this journey, 2 of them were based on the continent, 2 of them were based in the US. from African diaspora. And of course, the person who's probably known to many of you in the room who are local is Ambrose Wonkum, who was based here in South Africa until relatively recently. It was an amazing learning experience for us, but we also called out inappropriate practice in science across the world, actually. There were pieces there on inappropriate practice and prejudice in Europe, in North America, and elsewhere. And we need to acknowledge that problem in order for all of us collectively to move forward, do better science, and be more inclusive of those who do science. We provide a platform for discussion of science itself, but also policy and funding in Africa, as I alluded to already. A number of examples here. We wrote extensively about COVID-19 in Africa, the issue that was referred to yesterday very appropriately by the President and a number of other speakers of vaccine hoarding that happened at the beginning of the pandemic after the vaccine was developed. And then subsequently we wrote, I should emphasize that, you know, Africa's stories are not all negative stories, quite the opposite. There are amazing, there's amazing science and amazing efforts to celebrate here. So just as the beginning we wrote about vaccine hoarding and the problems with containing, if you like, COVID-19 on the continent, we subsequently wrote about the amazing developments actually here in South Africa in local vaccine production. There are other journals in the Nature portfolio. Here I'm showing you two examples, one from Nature Astronomy, specifically publishing a comment on to promote and popularize and share with the widest global audience about astronomy efforts across the continent. And another example from Nature Human Behavior, which specifically speaks to the gender angle in sciences on the continent. How, in order to have just an inclusive science, that science has to be done by all stakeholders, representing all stakeholders in society, and that most emphatically includes women. And indeed, another example of an editorial there, already a couple of years old, us very much supporting that agency that is required on this continent. The final comment I will make, of course, is that, well, we're not a science funder. We are a publisher. I myself am a long-term editor. There are a number of ways in which I and my colleagues can support research, but of course when it comes to us, most of it is indeed done. Well, we believe that through our experience of dealing with research over many years, we can actually share that experience through mentoring of early career researchers, or indeed any researchers at any point. And so as part of Nature Portfolio, we have an extensive program of mentoring and called Nature Masterclasses. And they're in fact completely free to access in low and middle income countries. They're available online. They're extensive, ranging from topics such as ethics in science, preparing manuscripts, preparing talks, dealing with collaborations, you name it, that's essentially covered. Many of these masterclasses are presented by editors from nature journals as well, weaving in their own experience over many years. And we also have in the past created, and very much hope that we will also in the future create, bespoke workshops, specifically targeting needs of individual groups. And here's one example of a workshop that we held recently with an organization called Afrocentric, based in Nigeria, and that was specifically targeted for early career researchers, a day-long workshop. It was an online workshop to increase the attendance and accessibility to the workshop. Is they focused on early career researchers and especially on young women early career researchers. And so with this, I will end and say that you may think that you think about social justice in research, editors and publishers play a very limited role. I hope that I've shown you that through a number of ways in which we engage with the research community, we actually engage with you at many different points in your research cycle, in your research process. It's a continuum. It's not that you do your research and then you publish your paper and that's finished and then you something else. If you think about how you work, it's an ongoing process. You publish, you build on it. Often you will speak to editors, and if you don't, then I think you should. I would encourage that. So in a number of ways, we can work with the community. Figshare, for example, was mentioned earlier, something we now integrate into our submission system. We partner with Figshare to help data sharing, another way in which we support open science in our publications. So with this, I stop, and thank you.
Thank you very much. We have managed to get Thuli Madonsela online, so if we can do the live streaming.
Right. Greetings, colleagues. Thank you for the privilege to join you on this very important occasion. I'm particularly impressed and encouraged that as scientists, you decided to focus this conversation on social justice and science. I will therefore be talking to you very briefly about social justice in health research funding, a case for mandatory prospective social justice impact certificates for health research funding criteria and grants. I am from the Center for Social Justice at Stellenbosch University. Our work focuses on social justice with a view to enhancing the integration of social justice perspectives in all research, academic work, and policy and law reform processes in government. My talk with you will briefly touch on the gift we have received from COVID-19, which has caused us to look beyond one size fits all. The second one will be to look at, are we all human, and do we equally deserve justice? Then I'll look at the importance of EPIC health research funding, and I'll explain what is that EPIC health research funding. I'll talk about, can data science be leveraged for equitable health research funding? And lastly, what can be done? Thoughts on mandatory justice impact requirements. Like all policy interventions, funding can advance social justice or exacerbate existing disparities and inequity. Key dimensions in this regard include who gets funded and who does not, what gets funded and what does not. More ominous is funding that unintentionally exacerbates social injustice and related disparities. This paper explores the potency of a mandatory prospective impact assessment of funding criteria for health research, focusing on eschewing the exacerbation of social injustice in access to and monitoring COVID-19, regulatory impact, and compensatory support. It also includes research and pilot work on a social justice impact assessment matrix. When COVID-19 came, the chair established an initiative that is called SCOPRA, Social Justice Policy and Regulatory Impact Monitoring Alliance. There's been negative experiences from COVID, but there's also been positive experiences. The most positive thing from COVID-19 is laying bare what we are as a world, and therefore how socially neutral policies have an impact of leaving behind those who are already behind, and even adding more people to those who are being pushed behind. We've also learned from COVID-19 that where there's gross inequalities and poverty, those societies have people who are vulnerable to pandemics and other diseases. They also have less resilience to assist them to rebound from such difficulties. But we also learned that not only do you get then communities and groups that are vulnerable to pandemics and other public health challenges, we also found that societies that have gross disparities, such as the Gini coefficient that is above 4, 5, and for some like my country, hovering around 0.7, are societies that are facing fragility, where the attack of COVID-19 or any other health pandemic feeds into social unrest. We saw that in America, we saw that in South Africa, we saw that in some countries in Asia, where disparities were exacerbated by lockdown rules and just the fears that people's tolerance for malgovernance was reduced considerably. The Universal Declaration on Human Rights entrenches a scheme of human rights that basically ensure that everyone must enjoy civil, political, economic, social, and cultural rights. Among these is Article 25 that says everyone has the right to a standard of living adequate for health and well-being for himself and his family. And this includes food, clothing, housing, and medical care, and necessary social services, and the right to security in the event of unemployment, sickness, disability, widowhood, old age, and other lack of livelihood in circumstances beyond his control. Why then is health seemingly like a Potemkin village? In other words, something that promises goodness and joy for everyone, but at the end of the day, it's all a charade. What is inside is not what is promised. This begs the question, are we all human and deserving of justice? If the Universal Declaration on Human Rights promises everyone all human rights, and Article 25 promises everyone the right to health, and then health researchers, like everyone else, are promised economic opportunities and everything, right to work, and everything that is being promised in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. But take the Universal Declaration on Human Rights with the covenants, the one on social rights and the covenant on civil and political rights. Include CEDAW, CED, CRC, CRPD, and all of these conventions, which I've included here. Beyond those, in Africa, we talk about the Maputo Protocol, the African Charter on Human and People's Rights, and SADC, international law. Then we also have soft law, or what I refer to as soft law, which are declarations such as the Vienna Declaration on Human Rights that says everyone is entitled to all human rights are indivisible and interdependent. Then you have and then you have the Copenhagen Declaration on Social Development that specifically deals very extensively with the issue of social justice. You move from there to the Millennium Declaration that gave us MDGs and now the Sustainable Development Goals. I can just count so many instruments, and in countries such as South Africa, Nepal, India, Kenya, not only do you have constitutions that promise de facto and de jure equality, in other words, substantive equality, these constitutions specifically enjoin the country to move towards social justice. Ours specifically says we adopt it in order to heal the divisions of the past and establish a new society that is founded on democratic values, social justice, and fundamental human rights. So ideally, then, this would mean everyone should be enjoying not just some human rights. For example, people think poor people only deserve to enjoy social and economic rights. But clearly, these instruments promise all human rights to everyone. So why then is there injustice? Well, justice, according to John Rawls, is the first virtue of social institutions. Each person possesses an inviolability founded on justice that even the welfare of society as a whole cannot override. Rawls says justice is fairness to all. And societies that are just have a set of principles that are required for choosing among the various social arrangements which determine the division of advantages and for underwriting an agreement on the proper distributive shares. These principles are the principles of social justice, he says. They provide a way of assigning rights and duties in the basic institutions of society, and they define the appropriate distribution of the benefits and burdens of social cooperation. So ideally, health is supposed to be a benefit of social cooperation. As John Rawls says, we come into society so that our fortunes are better by living together. We also cooperate with others in the progress of our societies so that our own lives may be improved. And of course, health is one of the most essential rights involved. So how is it then that there isn't enough access to the funding of health research? One of the problems in this regard, as I conclude, is inequality just in terms of resources. For example, 52% of the richest people in the world take 10%, the richest 10% in the world take already 52% of global income, whereas the bottom of society, the bottom half of society, only gets 8.5% of income. And when it comes to wealth, it's even worse. The 2% at the top own 50% of income. And, well, no, sorry, the 10% at the top own 76% of all wealth, whilst the bottom 50% own 2%. And obviously, when COVID hit and societies imposed lockdowns, those that are poor were confined. But the good thing is that COVID then taught us that when you regulate in ways that do not recognize difference and disadvantage, you exacerbate it. And then with health funding, it's the same. We say social justice is about embracing the humanity of all, reflected in the just, equitable, and fair distribution of all opportunities, resources, benefits, privileges, and burdens in a society and between societies. So social justice is ultimately about the equal enjoyment of all rights and freedoms. And we then take into account difference and disadvantage. Here at the chair, we've suggested an instrument that's called the Social Justice Impact Assessment Matrix, but people have to look at, before you come up with a policy, even if it's a policy on funding, think about, will it exacerbate disadvantage and advantage? Or will it restitute and bring those who are disadvantaged into the fold or into inclusion? And just one thing that I talk about in the paper is the question of funding for COVID-19. We saw incredibly that leaders of the world tried to make sure that the vaccines were available to everyone. But we didn't see much funding going into testing so that testing could be democratized as well. And that then limited prevention. And we know not everyone went into vaccines, which takes me to also research funding. But there are indigenous approaches that people went for. For example, I was going to tell you about two stories, Mary and Gugu. Mary decided to vaccinate, but the question of research funding came into play in that when she had something that could possibly be a COVID vaccine injury, there was nobody to tell her what are the symptoms, what data does she need to prove that this is a COVID-19 injury, vaccine injury. Then we have Mary, who has used artemisia and other traditional things, and it seems to have worked. Gugu, sorry. But what we don't know is what is the long-term impact of those who have used artemisia. And there was an opportunity to test the efficacy of artemisia when COVID-19 hit us at the beginning of 2020. Why has that not happened? So for me, it boils down to two things: inequalities or injustices within countries and disparities between countries. And an approach that says all humans are humans would mean that we value all the available information and the available knowledge systems, including indigenous knowledge systems. Secondly, we democratize the funding of research. And thank you for this privilege. I do hope that this discussion will lead not only to just democratizing of funding, but democratizing of funding priorities so that we can leverage the indigenous knowledge systems and make sure that countries in Africa are not always seen as consumers of science, but Africa claims its place as one of the leading continents when it comes to science. And we've done that, for example, here at Stellenbosch University by discovering one of the variants of COVID-19. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor Tuli. We appreciate you taking the time to come online with us. We're going to do a round of questions quite quickly. I've got 1, 2, any other 3? Can we move the mic with some enthusiasm, please? Over here? Okay, give it there.
All right. Thank you very much. Thank you, speakers. My name is Peggy Utibuating, and I was the Director for Science Policy and Capacity Building that drove Open Science. So thank you all for it. And one of the key areas which we should, as Africans, is that there's a component of core values and principles. And this is where we're missing. And I think, that area is very important, that you don't get the issue of AAS, or you don't get the issue of, we are not democratizing, science. And if we need to do that, I think that's a very important component which we should be looking at. I also wear another hat of the executive director of AAS, a new one. I'm only there a month ago, and it's real what is happening. And if we have to have open science and democratize science, particularly in Africa, and I remember the African countries were the last to come to the table for this reason. And one of the areas is our indigenous knowledge systems, which is being used, and we are not putting the core values and principles. And I call all of us to that, whether it's publishers, whether it's scientists, whether young aspirants, please. This is a core area which we must all look at. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Next question.
Sharif Matta from Canada and Egypt.
Closer.
Sharif Matta from Canada and Egypt. I just, one thing, I refer back to the very beginning of this meeting. One thing that I felt is a little bit missing from the discussion is the importance of fundamental science. There is a lot of focus on applied and impact science on society, but in order to have applied science, you have to have science to apply, as one of my former supervisors used to tell us. So I'd like to see a little bit of a discussion about the importance of fundamental science. Thank you.
Thank you. Over, on this side.
Thanks. My name is Noella from Wageningen University in the Netherlands. And my question is actually to you, Magdalena, also from Nature. I think the most fundamental social justice in my mind would be like what the Netherlands has done with Elsevier. Because there, then Dutch researchers, when we write, we don't pay, it's all open access. Of course, it was a political fight between researchers and journals. And when I think of the African researchers as well, do you want us to fight before we can get this as well? So for me, I think, sometimes I think as researchers, we are a bit stupid because we do the writing, we do the reviewing, and then we have to pay for it. Or people have to pay to read our papers. So for me, I think this is such a fundamental thing in terms of social justice that needs to be looked into.
Okay, thank you. Can you pass it to the back, please? Thank you.
Thank you very much. Let me first thank all the speakers, and especially Professor Dakora, President of the AAS. The experience he shared with us is an experience that is surprising and at the same time troubling. And I find it troubling because here is a Pan-African organization that should be respected, and unfortunately, it didn't turn out that way. And so out of that experience, I just want to find out from him how AAS has been able to navigate the waters and repair whatever relationship has to be repaired so that funders would continue to have confidence in relating to AAS, because your experience definitely didn't have repercussions only for AAS. It also has repercussions for other Pan-African organizations, and we need to find out how best we can address the issues of conflicts and resolve them.
Thank you very much. I think, was there another question up? Then Professor Dakora, if we can go on to you with the last question. Yeah.
Thank you very much for your question. Look, I don't know where to start. It's difficult to repair a divorce. It's very difficult. So this was a straight divorce. And when there is divorce, both parties don't want to see each other. Personally, you ask me, I don't want those.
Let me remind you, you're standing between us and lunch. So.
Okay, all right, all right. Thank you. Personally, like you saw what the quotation that we put in the protest letter to the funders. Look, we all have dignity and there's human pride. We don't want the academy to be hijacked. Essentially, what happened was just they hijacked the academy and actually attempted to recolonize it. So we are not interested in their money. The academy is doing very well as I talk. We're doing the things that we were supposed to do as traditional academy. There are some people that are working with us. They believe in us and they have confidence in what we are doing. So we are not interested in going back to rogue culture. I mean, it's not right. So we are not keen to repair any relationship with those particular funders, no. Maybe that can happen one day when I am not the president. But personally, I've had enough of them. I think they can go somewhere with their money, and we do our own thing. You know, look, there has to be respect. There has to be respect, and mutual respect. And what they did was totally unacceptable. I don't mind them taking the money away. What bothers me is literally lying with their tongues hanging just because they are powerful funders from the global north. That for me is unacceptable. We're all human beings. And that is just it. We're not keen. We have got people that are with us. They are working with us. There's a project called Arise with the European Union. It's working very well. We've got something ongoing with the Academy and NASEM, that's the U.S. National Academy of Science, Engineering, and Medicine, that are working with us. There are other institutions that are coming to the table. We don't need 200 million or whatever. Sorry?
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. We have to wrap up before we sit with no audience. So, Professor Madonsela, if I can ask you to make some closing comments. Can you? I don't think she can hear us.
No, maybe not.
Professor Madonsela, can you hear us?
She's muted.
She's muted, but I don't.
She's muted.
Can you hear us, Professor Madonsela? If you can hear us, can you please make some closing comments on some of the questions that were asked? I don't think she can hear us. Okay, maybe Magdalena, I can go to you. There's a mic right next to you.
Thank you. Would you like me to make some closing
Hello.
Some of the,
Can I give my closing comments?
yeah, please.
Hello?
Hello, can you hear us?
May I give my closing comments?
Yeah, you can talk now. We can hear you.
All right. Thank you, Prof. Colleagues, thank you for this privilege, and I apologize for the messy way in which it has unfolded because of my inability to be there. My final proposal is that to make sure that health funding is not based on one size fits all, which basically is the size of historically advantaged. We need to consider having instruments that are compulsory at global level, maybe World Health Organization at global level, and then at country level. These compulsory instruments that could be hard law or soft law should compel whoever is funding to prospectively assess the potential disparate impact of the funding criteria that they're using, and they should constantly evaluate whether the funding criteria they're using at the moment exacerbates inaccess to such funding and also exacerbates disparities in terms of which kind of scientific inquiries are being funded. Are they mostly Western? Are they mostly from historically disadvantaged communities? Or are they mostly from all communities? In fact, I would add, taking into account the international instruments that I've spoken about in country constitutions that include remedial measures or positive actions, that funding criteria should also include remedial measures to make sure that those who are disadvantaged or who have been disadvantaged not on their own by historical injustices are now lifted so that they can access this funding. We should then honestly say all human rights are accessible to all humans, because as long as one size fits all, then some are human and others are not, which was the case when the Universal Declaration of Human Rights was adopted. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor Madonsela. Then maybe the one question that was asked on the funding and the issue that Felix raised, if you maybe want to address that issue about the response of AAS to the funders.
You mean so I wanted to make 2 points, if I may. The first one, just for those of you who haven't read the editorial that Professor Dakora referred to, I just pulled it up. The editorial ends with the following statement. All those involved have a responsibility to make sure that Africa's premier science academy succeeds and fulfills its mission to represent and boost science on the continent. So the vote of confidence in our pages was very much behind the African Academy of Sciences. The response in our pages, the author of the response is very much open. There is a specific format which we offer for a response, and we're very open to that response. But our position very much is that the African Academy of Sciences is a premier organization, represents the global research effort on the continent. And the reason why I say global is that leads me to my second point that I want to end with. And it's a bit of a dream that I want to share with you. Here in this room, in this conference, other rooms that I find myself in, other conferences, we talk too much about divisions. We talk too much about North and South and East and West. Science is, in my view, especially today in a divided world, the one chance we have for bringing us all together. So when we talk about science, let's really talk about global science, science that includes indigenous knowledge, science that includes basic science as well as applied science, science that is accessible and science that is open, so not just open papers, they are very important, but also data, sharing that information, and science that is done by all of us together for the common good. A bit of a dream. If I can help make that dream happen with your help, all of your help, the help of scientific community, then I will feel fulfilled. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that clarification. I realize we've gone 30 minutes over time, and I would like to close this session. Sorry. Very quickly.
And incidentally, there was a question about fundamental science. We do that as well. We do some of the awardees of various grants have the chance to embark on whatever they want to do. If you take the ARISE program, it's your choice. It doesn't have to be applied science. It can be straight blue sky science, if you want to call it so.
Okay.
So that's just what I wanted to say. And I hear what my colleague on the panel has said, and incidentally, it was very intentional to have her here. It was my decision, and it was her decision to accept the offer. Because if she was not here, it would sound different. But she's here. She knows how painful it is. It's terrible for people to be irresponsible by lying. Those funders lied. There's nothing wrong with the government of the air. Nothing.
Thank you.
So that's just what I want to say. And I still expect that you will come up with a corrective measure. You're the editor, you wrote the article. Otherwise, we'll be compelled to seek other people who can write the
Professor
response.
Takora, we're going to lose our audience. I want to conclude before we lose the audience. One of our elder founder members of the Academy wants to say something quickly.
Yes, thank you very much for the opportunity. I think we should bring this conversation not only to an end, but into a positive end. If you want change, the change has to be holistic, global. You just change the mind and leave the system itself intact. Everything has to change, the mind and the system. Good intention, good pleasures are fine. But if we continue to live in the same system, distorted system, nothing will change. So we have to take it all together, not just talking, but doing also.
Okay, thank you very much. I think this has been an eye-opener. We've all spoken our minds, and I think the way open is there. If you can just wait a few minutes. We have sent a register around for people to fill in with your details. We are going to put a statement on Google Drive that we invite everybody to add to, make suggestions, comments, etc., to the statement. So if you have not filled in the register, please make sure that you fill it in, that your contact details are there. Aina's got the register there. Please fill it in, and please add your comments on Google Drive. Can I just check with my co-chair? Do you have anything? No? If not, thank you very much for your active contribution, and to the speakers as well for their participation. It's been an exciting discussion, and enjoy the rest of the forum. Thank you very much.